Dust swirled across the main street of Redemption Springs as Ruby Galloway clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, painfully aware of the whispers that followed her like shadows. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as its scorching sun, especially to a woman alone, with nothing but determination and a dress that had seen far better days. Ruby kept her head high, despite the stares that burned hotter than the midday sun. 3 years of hardship had taught her to wear dignity like armor, even when her actual clothing was falling apart at the seams. The faded blue calico dress that had once been her Sunday best now hung in tatters, patched so many times it resembled a quilt more than a garment. "Look at that vagrant," a woman in a fine silk dress whispered to her companion as Ruby passed the general store. The nerve, parading around decent folk looking like that. Ruby's cheeks burned, but she continued walking. The insults weren't new. Since arriving in Redemption Springs 2 weeks ago, she'd endured countless jabs about her appearance. The boarding house where she'd found work as a cleaner barely paid enough to keep her fed, let alone clothed properly. "Miss Galloway!" The shout came from behind her. Ruby turned, recognizing the voice of Mrs. Pratt, her employer. The stout older woman bustled toward her, face pinched with displeasure. "Miss Galloway, I've received complaints about your appearance." Mrs. Pratt's eyes swept over Ruby's patched dress with distaste. "I run a respectable establishment. My guests shouldn't have to look upon such destitution." Ruby's throat tightened. "I apologize, Mrs. Pratt. I'm saving for new fabric." "I'm afraid that's not sufficient. I'll need you to find other employment." Mrs. Pratt pressed a single coin into Ruby's palm. "This is for your day's work. Please don't return tomorrow." Ruby stood frozen as Mrs. Pratt walked away, the single coin burning in her palm like a brand of shame. Another door closed, another opportunity lost. She'd come west after losing everything in the Chicago fire, determined to build a new life. But at 22, with no family and precious little money, her options were growing scarcer by the day. A raucous laugh drew her attention to the saloon across the street. The Silver Dollar was doing brisk business, even this early in the day. Ruby had avoided it thus far, clinging to the principles her father had instilled in her. But principles didn't fill an empty stomach. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the dusty street, ignoring the snickers that followed her. She knew what they thought, that she was finally accepting her inevitable fate as a saloon girl. Let them think what they wanted. She needed work, and she'd do anything honest to survive. The swinging doors of the Silver Dollar creaked as Ruby pushed through them. The dimly lit interior smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and sweat. Conversations paused as heads turned toward her. At the bar, 3 well-dressed women in ruffled dresses and painted faces assessed her with cool, calculating stares. Well, one of them drawled, her red lips curling into a smirk. "Look what the wind blew in. I think you got the wrong place, honey. The church charity is across town." Laughter rippled through the room. Ruby gripped her shawl tighter but stood her ground. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can clean, serve drinks, cook." "Honey, look at yourself," another woman interrupted, gesturing at Ruby's ragged dress. "You think anyone wants to be served by someone who looks like they slept in a stable?" More laughter followed, crueler this time. Ruby felt heat rushing to her face, but she refused to flee. She needed this job. "I believe the lady said she's looking for work." The deep voice cut through the laughter like a knife. The room fell silent as a tall figure rose from a corner table. Ruby hadn't noticed him before, a man sitting alone, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Now, as he stood and stepped into the light, she could see him clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark duster coat that had seen its share of trails. A weathered cowboy hat shadowed keen blue eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "Sheriff Blackridge," one of the saloon girls acknowledged, her mocking tone instantly replaced with deference. "Beau Blackridge," he corrected, approaching the bar. "Not sheriff anymore, just passing through." His eyes never left Ruby as he spoke. "And I believe this establishment could use someone willing to work honestly." The bartender, a burly man with a thick mustache, frowned. "No offense, Blackridge, but look at her. She'd scare away customers." Several men at nearby tables snickered. Ruby felt her last thread of hope fraying. Beau Blackridge studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to address the room. "You all ought to be ashamed," he said, his quiet voice somehow filling the space. "Mocking a woman for clothes, when character is what matters." He looked back at Ruby, something warming in his gaze. "From where I'm standing, she's wearing the finest thing I've ever seen, dignity that doesn't come from fancy cloth, but from what's inside." The saloon fell silent. Ruby felt something shift in her chest, a small flutter of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition, respect. The bartender cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, I suppose we could use help in the kitchen." "Good," Beau said with a nod, "and pay her fairly." He tipped his hat to Ruby, the gesture so gentlemanly it seemed from another world. "Madam." With that, he returned to his table, leaving Ruby standing taller than she had in months. The bartender, still looking uncomfortable, gestured for her to follow him. "Kitchen's this way. You can start today." As Ruby followed, she caught Beau Blackridge watching her, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She offered a small nod of gratitude, wondering who this man was who had defended her when no one else would. Little did she know that this encounter would change the course of her life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The kitchen of the Silver Dollar was sweltering, but Ruby welcomed the heat as she scrubbed pots with vigor. After 3 days of working from dawn until well past midnight, her hands were raw and her back ached, but she had earned enough to secure a small room above the laundry and put aside a few coins for fabric. "You're still here, I see." Ruby startled at the deep voice, nearly dropping the pot she was cleaning. Beau Blackridge stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. She hadn't seen him since that first day, and had begun to think he'd moved on. "Mr. Blackridge," she acknowledged, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am. Thank you for what you did." He shrugged, the gesture casual, but his eyes were intent on her face. "I didn't do much, just reminded folks of something they should already know." Ruby smiled slightly. "Still, not many would have spoken up. Not many have seen what I've seen." Something in his tone suggested depths of experience beyond his years, which Ruby guessed to be around 30. "How are they treating you?" "Well enough. The work is hard but honest." Beau nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. That's good." He hesitated, then pulled something from his coat. "I brought you this." It was a package wrapped in brown paper. Ruby stared at it, confused. "I can't accept gifts, Mr. Blackridge." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "Consider it an investment in a hard-working person." When she still hesitated, he added, "Please, it would mean something to me." Slowly, Ruby took the package and unwrapped it. Inside was a length of sturdy blue cotton fabric, enough for a new dress. Her throat tightened with emotion. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's nothing fancy," he said, almost apologetically. "Just practical?" "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why help me? You don't know me." Something flickered in his blue eyes. A memory, perhaps, or a pain long carried. "Let's just say I recognize determination when I see it." He tipped his hat. "Good evening, Miss Galloway." He turned to leave, but Ruby called after him. "How did you know my name?" He glanced back, a small smile touching his lips. "I asked around. In my line of work, information is valuable." "And what is your line of work, Mr. Blackridge?" "You said you're not a sheriff anymore." "These days, I'm just a man trying to right some wrongs." With that cryptic answer, he left, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Ruby looked down at the fabric in her hands, running her fingers over the smooth cotton. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness without expecting something in return. The feeling was as unfamiliar as it was warming. That night, after her shift ended, Ruby sat in her tiny rented room by lamplight, carefully cutting the fabric. Her mother had taught her to sew when she was just a girl, and the familiar motions brought comfort. As her needle flashed in the dim light, she found herself wondering about Beau Blackridge. Who was he? What wrongs was he trying to right? And why had he taken an interest in her? She worked until her eyes grew heavy, and as she drifted to sleep, her dreams were filled with blue eyes and a voice that made her feel, for the first time in years, like she wasn't alone. Morning brought a commotion to Redemption Springs. Ruby, hurrying to her early shift at the Silver Dollar, found a crowd gathered outside the sheriff's office. Curious, she paused at the edge of the throng. "They say it's the Clayton gang," a man was saying excitedly. "Robbed the bank in Tucson last month. 3 of 'em holed up in the old Wilkins cabin," another added. "Sheriff's organizing a posse." Ruby's blood ran cold. Everyone knew of the Clayton gang, ruthless outlaws who left few survivors. They'd terrorized the territory for over a year. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked the woman beside her. "Not yet," the woman replied. "But they've got a hostage old man, Peterson, who was checking his traps. Sheriff sent word to Fort Graham for the cavalry, but they won't arrive till tomorrow at the earliest." The crowd parted as Sheriff Mills emerged from his office, flanked by several armed men. Behind them, to Ruby's surprise, stood Beau Blackridge, strapping on a gun belt. "We ride in 20 minutes, Sheriff Mills announced. "Any man willing to join the posse, step forward now." Several men volunteered, but Ruby barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on Beau. He must have felt her gaze, for he looked up, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then he gave her a small nod, as if to reassure her. Ruby watched as the posse mounted up and rode out of town, a knot of worry forming in her stomach. She'd seen what outlaws could do. Her own father had been killed by road agents 5 years earlier, his wagon robbed and burned with him inside it. The memory still haunted her nightmares. The day passed in agonizing slowness. Ruby went through her tasks mechanically, her thoughts constantly returning to the posse and the danger they faced. When gunshots echoed from the distant hills late in the afternoon, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. It was nearly dusk when the posse returned. Ruby rushed outside with everyone else, scanning the weary riders for Beau's tall figure. Her heart clenched when she didn't see him immediately. Then the crowd shifted, and she spotted him at the rear, supporting a wounded man on his horse. Relief flooded her, followed immediately by confusion at the intensity of her reaction. Why should she care so much about a man she barely knew? The wounded man was carried to the doctor's house, while Sheriff Mills reported to the anxious crowd. "Clayton and 1 of his men are dead. The 3rd escaped, but he's wounded, won't get far. Peterson's safe, though shaken up." He looked grim but satisfied. "Couldn't have done it without Blackridge here. Man's a damn good shot." Beau dismounted, wincing slightly. Ruby noticed a dark stain spreading on his left sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, stepping forward without thinking. He glanced down as if surprised. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me." "Let me help." The words came automatically. "I know something of treating wounds." Beau looked like he might refuse, but then nodded. "Much obliged." In the back room of the Silver Dollar, Ruby cleaned and bandaged his arm with supplies from the barkeep's medical kit. The wound was indeed just a graze, but it had bled freely. "You're good at this," Beau observed as she worked. "My father was a freight hauler," she explained. "I traveled with him for years after my mother died. You learn to patch up all sorts of injuries on the trail." "What happened to him?" Beau asked softly. Ruby's hands stilled momentarily. "Outlaws. 5 years ago, near Santa Fe. They wanted his cargo. He refused to give it up without a fight." Her voice grew distant. "I was in town buying supplies. When I returned, the wagon was burning. He was still inside." Beau's expression darkened. "I'm sorry." Ruby tied off the bandage, avoiding his eyes. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long." His hand covered hers briefly. "Time doesn't heal all wounds, no matter what they say." She looked up, surprised by the understanding in his voice. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "My wife and son, 7 years ago. Cholera took them both in less than a week." Ruby's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry." "Like you said," he replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It was a long time ago." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with shared understanding. Finally, Ruby gathered the courage to ask what had been on her mind. "The sheriff called you a good shot. Were you really a sheriff before?" Beau nodded. "Up in Wyoming Territory, for 4 years after Sarah and little Thomas died. Thought the badge might give me purpose." "Did it?" "For a while." He flexed his bandaged arm experimentally. "Then I realized a badge doesn't make justice. Sometimes it just gets in the way. So now you're a bounty hunter. He said it without pride or shame, simply stating a fact. I track men who need tracking, like the Clayton gang. Among others, he stood, towering over her in the small room. Thank you for the doctoring, Miss Galloway. Ruby, she said impulsively. Please call me Ruby. Something warmed in his eyes. Ruby, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Thank you, Ruby. He left then, but the way he'd said her name lingered in her mind long after he was gone. The next morning, Ruby wore her new dress to work. She'd stayed up late finishing it. The simple design, enhanced by careful stitching, and a bit of lace she'd salvaged from her old shawl. The blue fabric brightened her gray eyes and complemented her chestnut hair, which she'd pinned up neatly. The reactions as she walked through town were gratifying. People who had previously looked through her now nodded in greeting. Mrs. Holcomb at the general store even smiled and commented on the lovely color. Ruby knew their sudden friendliness was shallow, but she couldn't deny it made her daily life easier. At the Silver Dollar, the bartender did a double take. Well, don't you clean up nice, he said, sounding genuinely impressed. Almost didn't recognize you. Ruby thanked him and went about her duties. She'd hoped to see Beau, to thank him properly for the fabric, but there was no sign of him all morning. By afternoon, she began to worry he might have left town without saying goodbye. Her fears were confirmed when she overheard two men at the bar. Blackridge rode out at dawn, one said, told the sheriff he was tracking that Clayton fellow who escaped. Alone, man's either brave or crazy. Maybe both, but there's $500 on Clayton's head, dead or alive. Ruby's spirits fell. She told herself it was foolish to feel disappointed. Beau Blackridge was a bounty hunter, a man who lived by the gun and moved with the wind. He'd shown her kindness, yes, but that didn't mean anything more. Men like him didn't put down roots, especially not for women they barely knew. Still, as she worked through the day, she found herself glancing at the door whenever it opened, hoping to see his tall figure. 3 days passed with no word of Beau. Ruby settled into a routine, saving her wages carefully. The new dress had given her confidence, and she'd begun taking in sewing work in the evenings for extra money. Her little room was starting to feel like a home. With a few modest touches, a vase of wildflowers, a patchwork quilt she'd pieced together from scraps. On the 4th day, as Ruby was hanging laundry behind the Silver Dollar, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Shielding her eyes against the sun, she watched as a rider came down the street at an easy trot. Her heart leaped when she recognized Beau, then froze when she saw he wasn't alone. Draped across a second horse was a body, tied down and covered with a blanket. Ruby stood rooted to the spot as Beau dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mills came out, examined whatever Beau showed him, then helped carry the body inside. A small crowd gathered, but Ruby couldn't make herself join them. She'd known what Beau did for a living. He'd told her plainly. But seeing the evidence a man's body brought in like a package to be delivered made it suddenly, viscerally real. She returned to her work, trying to sort through her confused feelings. By the time she finished her shift that evening, she'd convinced herself it was for the best that Beau had returned. Now she could thank him properly for his help, wish him well, and put these strange, unsettling feelings behind her. Ruby was walking home through the deepening twilight when she heard footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, a familiar voice spoke. "That dress suits you." Beau stood a few paces away, his hat in his hands. He looked tired but unharmed, his eyes moving over her with undisguised appreciation. "Thank you," she said, suddenly shy. "For the fabric, I mean. It was very kind. You did it justice." He gestured to her skilled stitching. "I've never seen finer work." An awkward silence fell. Ruby knew she should say something about his successful hunt, but the words stuck in her throat. Beau seemed to read her thoughts. "I brought in Clayton. I saw. Does it bother you?" His voice was carefully neutral. "What'd I do?" Ruby considered her answer. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I understand the necessity of it. Men like Clayton don't stop hurting people willingly. But taking a life, even a guilty one." She struggled to articulate her feelings. "It leaves a mark on the soul, doesn't it?" Beau's expression softened. "Yes," he said simply. "It does. Another silence, but this one felt different, a space of understanding rather than awkwardness. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Beau said finally. "There's work up north." Ruby nodded, ignoring the pang in her chest. "I expected as much. I wondered—" He hesitated, then pushed on. "I wondered if you might join me for supper tonight, at the hotel restaurant, as a proper goodbye." Ruby's pulse quickened. "I'd like that." His smile transformed his weathered face. "I'll call for you at 7, if that suits." "It does." As he walked away, Ruby couldn't help but wonder if this proper goodbye would truly be the end of their strange connection, or the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Redemption Springs, with tablecloths and real china plates. Ruby had never dined there before, and as Beau led her to a corner table, she felt the stares of the other patrons. This time, however, they weren't looking at her with disdain, but with curiosity. Beau pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she sat. Ruby smoothed her blue dress nervously. She'd redone her hair and pinned her mother's cameo brooch, one of the few treasures she'd managed to save at her throat. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." He did indeed. He'd shaved and changed into a dark suit that, while not new, was well made and fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Without his duster and gun belt, he looked less like a dangerous bounty hunter and more like a respectable businessman. The waiter brought them menus, and Ruby's eyes widened at the prices. "Order whatever you'd like," Beau said, noticing her hesitation. Clayton's bounty was generous. Ruby chose the roast chicken, while Beau ordered steak. As they waited for their food, she found herself curious about the man across from her. "How did you become a bounty hunter?" she asked. Beau took a sip of water, considering. "After I gave up the sheriff's badge, I drifted for a while, worked as a ranch hand, tried prospecting, even dealt cards for a time." His mouth twisted wryly. "Nothing stuck. Then I tracked down a horse thief who'd stolen from the ranch where I was working. The local law gave me a reward. I realized I was good at tracking, and that bringing in men who hurt others, it gave me purpose." "Is it dangerous?" A foolish question perhaps, but she wanted to hear him speak more. "Can be. But most men, when cornered, choose to surrender rather than die." His eyes met hers steadily. "I don't kill unless I have no choice, Ruby. I want you to know that." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I believe you." Their food arrived, momentarily breaking the tension between them. As they ate, Beau asked about her life, listening intently as she told him about growing up on the trail with her father, learning to cook over campfires and sew by lantern light. "After he died, I tried making a life in Santa Fe," she explained. "Worked as a seamstress for a while, then as a school teacher's assistant. But when the Chicago fire happened, I lost what little savings I had in a bank that collapsed." "So you came west again?" Ruby nodded. "I thought, a fresh start. But it's been harder than I expected." "You're doing well," Beau said with genuine admiration. "Many would have given up by now." "I don't know how to give up," Ruby admitted. "It's a blessing and a curse. I understand that better than most." After dinner, they walked slowly back toward Ruby's lodgings. The night was cool, stars brilliant in the clear desert sky. Neither seemed eager for the evening to end. "Will you return to Redemption Springs?" Ruby asked as they reached her door. Beau looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Would you want me to?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibilities. Ruby knew the sensible answer: they barely knew each other. He lived a dangerous, rootless life, and she was finally building stability for herself. But sensible wasn't what her heart wanted in that moment. "Yes," she said softly. "I would." Beau's hand rose to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "Then I'll come back, when this job is done." Ruby's heart raced as he leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't want to. His lips touched hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. It was a kiss both tender and promising, an acknowledgement of something neither of them had expected to find. When they finally parted, Beau rested his forehead against hers. "I'll be gone a few weeks, maybe longer." "I'll be here," Ruby promised. He kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling, then stepped back. "Good night, Ruby Galloway." "Good night, Beau Blackridge." She watched him walk away into the darkness, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. Tomorrow he would be gone, riding into danger once more. But he had promised to return, and somehow Ruby believed him. True to his word, Beau left at dawn. Ruby, unable to sleep, watched from her window as his tall figure rode out of town, heading north. The weeks that followed were filled with work and waiting. Ruby's position at the Silver Dollar improved the bartender, impressed with her reliability, promoted her from kitchen help to serving tables. The pay was better, and though some customers were crude, most treated her with reasonable respect. News filtered into town about a notorious gang leader captured in Colorado territory. Though Beau's name wasn't mentioned, Ruby suspected he was involved. She found herself scanning the horizon whenever she had a free moment, hoping to see a familiar rider approaching. A month passed, then 6 weeks. Ruby tried not to worry, telling herself that Beau's work often took him to remote places. Still, each day without word made it harder to maintain her faith that he would return. In early October, as the desert heat finally began to ease, a stagecoach arrived carrying mail and newspapers from back east. Ruby, who had taken to checking for letters, though she knew Beau was unlikely to write, was passing the post office when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Says here a bounty hunter was killed up in Denver," a man was saying, reading from a newspaper. "Shot down by the Mullins brothers after he brought in their cousin." "Any name given?" another asked. "Let's see." The deceased, identified as Beau Blackridge, formerly a lawman in Wyoming Territory, died of his wounds before medical attention could be summoned. Ruby's world tilted. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, a roaring in her ears drowning out whatever else was said. Beau Blackridge. It couldn't be, and yet, how many bounty hunters named Blackridge had been Wyoming lawmen? Somehow, she made it back to her room before collapsing. The grief that washed over her seemed disproportionate to the brief time she'd known Beau, and yet it was overwhelming. They'd shared only a few conversations, one dinner, a single kiss, but in those moments, she'd glimpsed a future that now would never come to pass. For 3 days, Ruby moved through her duties like a ghost. She couldn't eat, barely slept. The bartender, concerned, told her to take time off, but she refused. Work was the only thing keeping her from drowning in sorrow. On the 4th day, as Ruby was sweeping the Silver Dollar's porch in the hazy light of dawn, a rider appeared at the edge of town. She barely glanced up, having learned the painful lesson of false hope. But something about the horse's gait caught her attention. She looked again, her heart suddenly hammering. The rider came closer, and Ruby's broom clattered to the wooden boards. It couldn't be, and yet it was. Beau Blackridge, very much alive, riding slowly toward her. Ruby didn't remember moving, but suddenly she was running down the street, heedless of the dust clinging to her skirts or the few early risers who stopped to stare. Beau saw her coming and dismounted, catching her as she flung herself into his arms. "You're alive!" she gasped against his chest, hardly believing the solid warmth of him. "They said you were dead." His arms tightened around her. Not quite, though it was a near thing. Ruby pulled back enough to look at him, noting the new lines of pain around his eyes, the pallor beneath his tan. "The newspaper." "Got it wrong," he finished. "Wouldn't be the first time. I was shot, but a doctor friend patched me up. Took longer to recover than I expected." "Why didn't you send word?" "I tried." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sent 2 telegrams. They must not have reached you." Ruby shook her head, tears threatening. "I thought I'd lost you. I'm harder to kill than that." His attempt at lightness faded as he saw her expression. "I'm sorry, Ruby. I never meant to cause you pain." She could see now that he was thinner, his movements careful as if guarding against injury. Whatever had happened in Denver had clearly been serious. "You need rest," she said, suddenly practical. "Food and proper care." Beau smiled, the warmth of it reaching his tired eyes. "Are you offering to nurse me back to health, Miss Galloway?" "Someone has to," she replied, taking his horse's reins. "You clearly can't be trusted to take care of yourself." His laugh, though strained, was the sweetest sound Ruby had heard in weeks. Beau took a room at the boarding house where Ruby now worked as a part-time housekeeper, having left the Silver Dollar for more respectable employment. His wound, a bullet that had passed through his side, missing vital organs by inches, was healing well, but had left him weakened from blood loss and subsequent fever. During his convalescence, they fell into a gentle routine. Ruby would bring him meals and sit with him while he ate, talking about her day, or listening to his carefully edited stories of life on the trail. As his strength returned, they took short walks together, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. Ruby learned that Beau had been born in Kentucky to a schoolteacher mother and a father who'd fought for the Union in the war. He'd come west as a young man, working cattle drives before meeting his wife Sarah, a shopkeeper's daughter, in a small Wyoming town. Their son Thomas had been born a year later, bringing Beau a happiness he'd never known before or since. After they died, he told Ruby one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset, "I couldn't bear to stay in that town. Every corner held memories. The badge gave me something to focus on besides grief." "And now?" Ruby asked softly. "What are you focusing on now?" Beau's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "A future I didn't think I'd have again." The words hung between them, full of possibility. They hadn't spoken of what would happen when he was fully recovered. Would he return to bounty hunting? Would she go with him if he asked? Or was there another path neither had considered? October gave way to November, bringing cooler nights and occasional dustings of frost. Beau grew stronger daily, though Ruby noticed he sometimes stared off into the distance, a restlessness in his eyes that worried her. The life he'd known for 7 years wasn't one easily set aside, no matter what his heart might want. The matter came to a head when Sheriff Mills approached Beau with a telegram from the territorial marshal. "They're asking for your help tracking the Halloran brothers," Mills explained as the three of them stood outside the sheriff's office. "They've been raiding homesteads near the border, killed a family last week." Ruby felt Beau tense beside her. The Halloran brothers were notorious for their brutality, especially toward women and children. "Marshall's offering $1,000 for each brother brought in," Mills continued. "Dead or alive. $3,000. It was more money than Ruby had seen in her entire life. Enough to buy land, build a home, start a business, or fund many more years of a bounty hunter's wandering life. "When do they need an answer?" Beau asked, his voice carefully neutral. "End of the week." Mills nodded to them both and returned to his office. Ruby and Beau walked in silence back toward the boarding house. The weight of the unspoken decision hung heavy between them. "You want to go?" Ruby finally said. It wasn't a question. Beau stopped walking, turning to face her. "Men like the Hallorans don't stop until someone stops them. And it has to be you?" She couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I'm good at what I do." There was no pride in his tone, just simple fact. "I know their methods, their hideouts, and if you don't come back this time," Ruby's fear made her words sharper than intended. "If the next newspaper gets it right," pain flashed across Beau's face. "Ruby?" "No." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't do this again, Beau. I can't spend weeks wondering if you're dead or alive, if every rider coming into town is bringing news that will destroy me." "What are you saying?" Ruby took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm saying you have to choose, this life or something else." The something else hung unspoken between them, a life together, stability, a chance at the happiness they'd both lost. Beau's expression hardened, then softened into something like regret. "I need time to think." Ruby nodded, her throat too tight for words. She turned and walked away, each step feeling like it might shatter her heart completely. For 2 days, they avoided each other. Ruby threw herself into work, taking on extra shifts to exhaust herself into dreamless sleep. On the 3rd day, she returned to her room to find a letter slipped under her door. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "Ruby?" It began in Beau's bold handwriting. "I've lived with ghosts for 7 years. My wife, my son, the men I've killed, the man I used to be. I thought that was all I deserved, a half-life of atonement and purpose without joy. Then I saw a woman in a ragged dress, standing tall despite everything the world had thrown at her, and something in me remembered how to hope. I'm not good with words, so I'll simply say this. I choose you, if you'll have me. Meet me at the church at sunset if your answer is yes. B. Ruby read the letter twice, her vision blurring with tears. Then she looked at the window, alarmed to see the sun already low in the sky. Quickly she changed into her blue dress, pinned up her hair, and hurried through town toward the small white church on the hill. Beau was waiting outside, hatless, his dark hair ruffled by the evening breeze. When he saw her approaching, his face transformed with a smile that took her breath away. "You came," he said simply. "Did you doubt I would? I've learned to expect the worst." His honesty was disarming. Hoping for the best is still new to me. Ruby stepped closer, looking up into his weathered face. "What about the Halloran brothers? I sent word to the marshal, recommended a tracker out of New Mexico who's almost as good as I am." He took her hands in his. "I'm done with that life, Ruby. I want to build something that lasts. What will you do instead?" Sheriff Mills mentioned the town's considering hiring a deputy. "It's not much pay, but it's steady work." He paused. "I've also been talking to the bank about a small ranch that's for sale outside town. Previous owner couldn't make a go of it, but the land's good, with some work." "A ranch?" Ruby couldn't hide her surprise. "I didn't know you wanted to be a rancher." "I worked enough cattle drives to know the basics." Beau's eyes held hers steadily. "But more than that, I want a home, a place to put down roots, with you if you'll share it." Ruby's heart soared. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Beau Blackridge?" "Not very well, apparently." He smiled ruefully, then, to her astonishment, lowered himself to one knee. "Ruby Galloway, I've wandered long enough. Will you marry me and make a home with me?" Ruby didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, I will." Beau rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss sealing the promise between them. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Ruby knew that this moment, this new beginning, was worth every hardship that had led her here. 3 weeks later, they were married in the same church where Beau had proposed. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Ruby wore a new dress of ivory satin that she'd sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Beau wore a new suit, looking so handsome it made her heart skip. To Ruby's surprise, much of the town turned out for the wedding. Mrs. Pratt, who had once fired her for her ragged appearance, brought a cake. The bartender from the Silver Dollar closed the saloon for the afternoon so he and his staff could attend. Even Sheriff Mills stood as Beau's best man. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said during the small reception afterward. Blackridge settling down. "Those Halloran brothers must be breathing easier." "I doubt it," Beau replied with a slight smile. "The tracker I recommended is probably closing in on them as we speak." Ruby, overhearing, squeezed her new husband's hand. She knew part of him would always be the man who hunted dangerous men, but she also knew he was committed to their new life together. That night, they stayed in the finest room at the hotel before leaving the next morning for their new home. The ranch was indeed small, a modest house, a barn in need of repair, and 50 acres of decent grazing land. But as they rode up to it in the wagon Beau had purchased, Ruby saw not what it was, but what it could become. "It needs work," Beau said, watching her reaction carefully. Ruby smiled, leaning against his shoulder. So did we. Their first year was hard but rewarding. Beau split his time between his deputy duties in town and building up the ranch. They started with just a few cattle and 2 horses, gradually adding to their stock as finances allowed. Ruby planted a vegetable garden and took in sewing work for extra money. The house slowly transformed under their care. Ruby made curtains and quilts, while Beau repaired the roof and built new furniture. Each improvement, no matter how small, made it more their home. By their first anniversary, Ruby had news that would change their lives once more. On a crisp December evening, as they sat before the fireplace Beau had built with his own hands, she took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. Beau's expression shifted from confusion to wonder. "A baby?" he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make it untrue. Ruby nodded, tears of happiness in her eyes. "In the summer." For a moment, Beau seemed frozen, overwhelmed by emotion. Then he gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Are you happy?" she asked against his shoulder. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. His voice was rough with feeling. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those and more. Ruby understood. For Beau, this was both a miracle and a reopening of old wounds. The son he'd lost could never be replaced, and this new child would bring both joy and painful memories. "We'll face it together," she promised, "whatever comes." Beau nodded, then placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Your mama and I have been waiting for you for a very long time." The months that followed were busy ones. Beau threw himself into preparing for the baby, with the same intensity he'd once devoted to tracking outlaws. He built a cradle of polished pine, expanded their modest herd to ensure financial security, and took on extra deputy shifts to save money. Ruby, meanwhile, sewed tiny garments and transformed a corner of their bedroom into a nursery space. As her body changed, she sometimes caught Beau watching her, with an expression of such tender wonder it brought tears to her eyes. Their baby, a daughter they named Sarah. After Beau's first wife was born, on a warm July evening in 1880, she had Ruby's gray eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to match her father's. When the midwife placed the swaddled infant in Beau's arms, he stood completely still, staring down at his daughter with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Then Sarah's tiny hand escaped her blanket and wrapped around his finger, and something in Beau's expression broke open. "Hello, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'm your pa." Ruby, exhausted but radiant, watched the two people she loved most in the world begin to know each other. This was what she'd seen in Beau from the beginning, not just the hard-edged bounty hunter, but the man capable of immense tenderness and love. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, their little family settled into a rhythm. Beau continued his deputy work, but spent more time at the ranch, which was slowly prospering under his care. Ruby found that motherhood, while exhausting, brought a fulfillment she'd never imagined. One evening, as snow fell gently outside their window and baby Sarah slept peacefully in her cradle, Beau pulled Ruby into his arms before the fire. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked, his chin resting on the top of her head. Ruby smiled at the memory. "In the Silver Dollar. You defended me when everyone else was mocking my dress." "I fell in love with you that day," Beau admitted. "Seeing you stand there, proud despite everything it was like watching courage take human form." "You said I was wearing the finest thing you'd ever seen," Ruby recalled. "Dignity, not fancy cloth." "And I meant it." He turned her to face him, his blue eyes serious. "But I was wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "I said dignity was the finest thing I'd ever seen." His hand cradled her cheek. "But it's not. Love is. The love that brought us here, that gave us Sarah, that's rebuilding this ranch in our lives day by day." He kissed her gently. "That's the finest thing in this world, Ruby, and I'm grateful for it every day." Ruby leaned into his embrace, knowing that all the hardships they'd endured, all the loss and struggle and pain, had led them to this moment of perfect contentment. From her ragged dress to his wandering ways, they'd traveled a long road to find each other. But standing in the warm circle of his arms, their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Ruby knew without doubt that every step had been worth taking. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their small ranch in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, casting golden light over the home they had built together, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the deeper dwelling place of shared dreams and mutual love. A home that, like the finest garment, had been stitched together with care, patched where necessary, and made beautiful by the dignity of those who inhabited it. Spring came early to redemption. Springs the following year, as the desert bloomed with wildflowers, so too did the Blackridge Ranch flourish. Beau had added 20 head of cattle to their small herd, and the vegetable garden Ruby had planted yielded enough to sell the excess in town. Sarah, now approaching her first birthday, was growing into a curious, happy child with her father's determined nature and her mother's quick smile. She took her first steps on a sunny April morning, toddling uncertainly from Ruby's outstretched arms to Beau's waiting hands. "She's going to be running before we know it," Ruby laughed as their daughter made the return journey, tiny face scrunched in concentration. Just like her mama, Beau said with a proud smile, unstoppable once she sets her mind to something. Life settled into a pleasant routine. 3 days a week, Beau rode into town for his deputy duties, returning by sunset. The other days, he worked the ranch, gradually expanding their operations with careful planning. Ruby divided her time between caring for Sarah, maintaining their home, and the small sewing business she'd established, making dresses and shirts for townspeople who appreciated her skilled needlework. It was a simple life, but a good one, the kind neither had dared hope for in their darkest days. Then, on a hot August afternoon, the past came calling. Ruby was hanging laundry while Sarah napped when she heard riders approaching. Looking up, she saw 3 men on horseback coming down the road toward their ranch. Something about their purposeful approach made her uneasy. Beau was in town, not expected back for hours. Quickly, Ruby gathered the laundry basket and retreated to the house, keeping an eye on the approaching strangers. As they drew closer, she could see they were rough-looking men, trail-worn and heavily armed, not the usual sort of visitors to their quiet ranch. The lead rider, a tall man with a ragged scar across his cheek, reined in before the house. "Afternoon, madam," he called. "This the Blackridge place?" Ruby stood in the doorway, one hand on the rifle Beau always kept loaded beside the entrance. "It is," she answered cautiously. "My husband isn't here right now." The man nodded as if this confirmed something. "That's all right. We'll wait." He dismounted, his companions following suit. "Name's Mullins, Frank Mullins. These are my brothers, Jesse and Cal." Ruby's blood ran cold. Mullins. The same name as the men who had reportedly shot Beau in Denver. The men whose cousin Beau had brought in. "What business do you have with my husband?" she asked, her hand tightening on the rifle. Frank Mullins smiled, the expression not reaching his cold eyes. "Old business." "Unfinished business?" "I think you should leave," Ruby said firmly, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Come back when my husband is here, if you must." "Now, that wouldn't be polite," Mullins drawled. "We've come an awful long way." He glanced at the clothesline, where tiny garments fluttered in the breeze. "Got a little one, I see. Boy or girl?" The casual mention of Sarah sent fear shooting through Ruby. "Please leave," she repeated, lifting the rifle slightly so they could see it. "Now." The 3 men exchanged glances, then Frank Mullins shrugged. "All right, madam, we'll go. But tell Blackridge we came calling, would you? Tell him the Mullins brothers don't forget a debt." They mounted their horses and rode away, but Ruby knew with sickening certainty that they wouldn't go far. They'd return when Beau came home, 3 against 1. As soon as they were out of sight, Ruby sprang into action. She gathered Sarah, still drowsy from her nap, and a few essential supplies. Saddling their fastest horse was difficult with the baby in her arms, but fear gave her strength. Within 20 minutes, she was galloping toward town, Sarah securely strapped to her chest. She reached the sheriff's office just as Mills was preparing to leave for his afternoon rounds. "Ruby," he said, alarmed by her disheveled appearance and the clear fear in her eyes. "What's happened?" "The Mullins brothers," she gasped, dismounting carefully with Sarah. "They came to the ranch looking for Beau. They said they had unfinished business." Mills' expression darkened. "Where's Beau now?" "I thought he was here, on deputy duty." "He was, but he left an hour ago. Said he was heading home early." Ruby's heart sank. Beau was riding straight into an ambush. Mills wasted no time. He called to a passing townsman. "Find Weston and Harper. Tell them to get their rifles and meet me at the Blackridge Ranch. Now." To Ruby, he said, "Stay here with the baby. Lock the door. I'll bring him back, Ruby, I promise." As Mills rode out with 2 hastily gathered men, Ruby paced the sheriff's office, Sarah fussing in her arms. The wait was unbearable, each minute stretching like hours. She tried to pray, but the words caught in her throat. All she could think was a desperate repeating plea. Please let him be alive. Please let him be alive. Nearly 2 hours later, she heard horses approaching. Rushing to the window, she saw Mills and his men returning, and with them, riding tall and unharmed, was Beau. Ruby flung open the door, tears of relief streaming down her face. Beau dismounted in one fluid motion and gathered her and Sarah into his arms. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "I'm all right." Later, after Sarah had been fed and put to bed in a makeshift crib at the sheriff's office, Beau explained what had happened. He'd taken a different route home, cutting across country instead of following the main road. When he arrived and found Ruby and Sarah gone, he'd immediately suspected trouble. "I was heading back to town when I met Mills and the others," he finished. "They told me about the Mullins brothers." "They're still out there?" Ruby said quietly. "Waiting?" Beau nodded, his expression grim. "Not for long. Mills is organizing a proper posse. We'll find them before they can cause any more trouble." "This is because of your bounty hunting days, isn't it?" "Their cousin." "Yes." Beau looked weary. "The past doesn't always stay buried, no matter how much we might want it to." Ruby took his hand. "What do we do now?" "You and Sarah will stay in town until this is settled. Mrs. Harper has offered her spare room." He squeezed her fingers. "I'm going with the posse." Ruby wanted to protest, to beg him to stay safe in town with them, but she knew he couldn't. The Mullins brothers had brought the fight to their doorstep, threatened their home and family. Beau wouldn't rest until the danger was eliminated. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said instead. "I promise." He pulled her close. "I have too much to live for to take foolish risks." The posse rode out at dawn the next day, 6 men including Beau and Sheriff Mills. Ruby stood on the boardwalk outside Mrs. Harper's house, Sarah in her arms, watching until they disappeared from sight. For 3 days she waited for news. Mrs. Harper was kind and her home comfortable, but Ruby could barely eat or sleep. Sarah seemed to sense her mother's anxiety, becoming fussy and difficult to soothe. On the 4th day, as Ruby was sitting on the porch trying to coax Sarah to eat, she spotted a single rider approaching town. Her heart leaped to her throat when she recognized Beau's broad-shouldered silhouette. He was dusty and unshaven, with a bandage visible on his forearm, but otherwise unharmed. Ruby ran to meet him as he dismounted in front of Mrs. Harper's house. "It's over," he said simply, gathering them both into his embrace. Later, after he'd bathed and eaten, Beau told Ruby what had happened. They'd tracked the Mullins brothers to an abandoned mine where they'd been hiding. "There was a shootout," he explained, his voice flat. "Frank and Jesse Mullins didn't survive. Cal surrendered. He's in the territorial prison now." Ruby studied her husband's face, seeing the shadows there. Despite everything, taking lives didn't come easily to him. It was one of the reasons she loved him. "Can we go home now?" she asked softly. Beau nodded, something easing in his expression. "Yes, we can go home." The incident with the Mullins brothers marked a turning point. Beau resigned his deputy position, deciding to focus entirely on their ranch. "No more guns," he told Ruby as they rode home together, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "From now on, I'm just a rancher and a family man." Ruby squeezed his hand, knowing what this decision cost him and what it meant for their future. As if freed from the last shadows of his past, Beau threw himself into expanding their ranch with renewed energy. By the following spring, their herd had doubled, and he'd hired 2 young cowboys to help with the increasing work. They built an addition to the house, a proper bedroom for Sarah, and a nursery for the new baby Ruby was expecting. Their son, William Thomas Blackridge, was born on a cool October evening in 1882. Unlike his sister's birth, which had filled Beau with trepidation, Will's arrival was met with pure joy. Beau held his newborn son with the confidence of a father who had found his place in the world. "He has your eyes," Ruby said tiredly as Beau brought the baby back to her side, after proudly showing him to 3-year-old Sarah. "And your strength," Beau replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for our family, Ruby, for everything." The years that followed were the happiest of their lives. The ranch prospered, allowing them to build a larger home when the children grew older. Sarah, with her father's dark hair and determined spirit, became a skilled horsewoman by the age of 10. Will, quieter and more thoughtful, showed a talent for working with animals, and an interest in medicine that the local doctor encouraged. Ruby's sewing business expanded into a small but successful dress shop in town, which she operated 2 days a week, while a trusted housekeeper watched the children. Beau's reputation as a fair employer and honest businessman grew, and he was eventually persuaded to serve on the town council. Occasionally, strangers would pass through town who recognized Beau from his bounty hunting days. Some greeted him with respect, others with wariness. But to the people of Redemption Springs, he was simply Beau Blackridge rancher, family man, community leader. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Beau surprised Ruby with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of Sarah and Will, painted by an artist who had visited town the previous month. "It's beautiful," Ruby said, tears in her eyes as she fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as what you've given me," Beau replied, taking her hand as they stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold. A second chance, a family, a life worth living. Ruby leaned against his shoulder, thinking of the ragged dress she'd worn when they first met, and how far they'd come since that day. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Giving up the trail for this?" Beau's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a single moment," he said with quiet certainty. "This life we've built, it's the finest thing I've ever known." From inside the house came the sound of Sarah laughing as she helped Will with his reading. Beyond the porch, their ranch stretched before them, cattle grazing peacefully, fields ready for harvest, all the fruits of their shared labor. Ruby looked up at her husband, seeing in his weathered face the same strength and kindness that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Time had added silver to his dark hair and lines around his eyes, but it had also softened the hard edges of the man he'd once been. "I love you, Beau Blackridge," she said simply. He smiled down at her, his blue eyes warm with the steady flame that had guided them both home. "And I love you, Ruby Blackridge, yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have left." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they'd made their own, Ruby thought of all the journeys that had brought them to this moment, his pursuit of justice, her search for belonging, their shared path toward healing, different roads that had somehow led to the same destination, each other's arms, and the home they had built together. In the end, it wasn't fancy cloth or a spotless reputation that had given them the life they now cherished. It was courage and kindness, forgiveness and faith, the finest things indeed, woven into the fabric of their shared story, a story that had begun with a ragged dress and a cowboy's unexpected defense, and had blossomed into something neither could have imagined on that fateful day in Redemption Springs.